This is the USDA plant hardiness map. It is based on the average annual minimum winter temperature for a zone. Gardeners can use this map to determine which plants are most likely to thrive at a location. As you can see, here in Fairfax County, we are in zone 7A. Now this map shows us the details of the hardiness zones of Virginia and the average first and last frost for a particular zone. Here is zone 7A. Again, Fairfax County is in zone 7A through this area. What this moderate transition zone allows is for the availability of a vast array of plants to create beautiful gardens. One flower that is currently blooming in zone 7A is Claytonia virginica. It is a spring ephemeral or wildflower. Its common name is spring beauty. Its habitat is in the moist woods, open meadows, and even can find them on our lawns. The distribution of the species is from Georgia to Nova Scotia and west to Texas. Its blooming period in our area runs from late February to early May. A typical mature Claytonia plant is 4 to 10 inches tall. When the two slender leaves of Claytonia first appear in early spring, they resemble the first glance of those of a grass. The pink or whitish flowers are striped with a dark pink that form a loose cluster. The flowers close at night and on overcast days, which protects the pollen in the flowers. The stripes serve as nectar lines for pollinators and remind us of peppermint candy striping. The nectar of Claytonia is very generous. At least 23 different species of native bees, bumblebees, honeybees, and syrphid flies have been observed visiting these flowers. The mature fruit, the fruit matures in about 10 days following pollination and fertilization. The seeds are forcibly ejected from the capsule at maturity and may be further dispersed by ants. Claytonia's underground storage stem is a small corm with many fibrous roots. The corm is quite tasty and has been a food source for Native Americans and is still eaten by wild food enthusiasts. The corms, which contain vitamins A and C, can be eaten raw or cooked like small potatoes. Squirrels and other forest wildlife will eat the corms. The leaves and flowers are also edible. Claytonia can be found across our area. Enjoy Claytonia mixed with Virginia bluebells at Bull Run Park in Manassas and Riverbend Park in Great Falls. And here is Jane to give us an overview of Serviceberry.
Thank you, Linda. I'm excited to talk about one of my favorite Virginia native plants. I'm going to give an overall introduction to the plant, and then Taunia will get into more specifics on how to take care of it in your garden. The botanical genus which Serviceberry belongs to is called Amelanchier. Within this genus are almost 30 shrubs and small trees, all but 2 of which are native to North America. They're deciduous, meaning they'll lose their leaves in the fall and then return to bloom again in the spring. You'll most often hear them called serviceberry in this area, and it's believed the name came from colonial times when the roads in the Appalachian Mountains became passable again in the spring, and preachers could then hold services. Other popular names used for plants in this genus include shadbush, juneberry, and saskatoonberry.
Jane, that's very interesting. I'm looking for a native plant that will provide year-round interest.
Well, then I think you might love serviceberry. It's a small tree. It grows to around 20 to 30 feet. So it's a similar size to a dogwood or a redbud. It has a delicate, graceful shape that provides dappled shade. It grows slowly, so this is not a tree that's going to get out of control in your landscape. In early spring, pretty white flowers appear. Many of them just finish flowering in this area. And then those flowers turn into red berries that will ripen and turn purple in late June or early July. Because the flowers come so early, sometimes a late frost can hit the blossoms, which will affect fruit set for that year. Luckily, we didn't have any late frost this year. Lush green leaves during the summer turn beautiful oranges and reds in the fall. It really is attractive in all 4 seasons.
It sounds attractive.
So there are 3 species that are most commonly found in our area. Amelanchier arborea is called downy serviceberry due to its fine hairs on its new leaves and branches. It's the largest and has a rounded shape. Amelanchier laevis, or smooth serviceberry, lacks the small hairs, but the new leaves are a bronze color at first before they fade to green. It tends to be slightly smaller, around 25 feet high. Finally, there's Amelanchier canadensis, called Canadian serviceberry. It's smaller again, and it's often found in wetter soils. So if you've got like a wet spot in your garden, this might be a good choice.
So if I wanted to plant a serviceberry in my garden, where can I get one?
So the 3 types I just went through, they are all straight species, meaning that they occur naturally in our region, and they've evolved here over many thousands of years. Some studies indicate straight species might be best for pollinators since they evolved along with the trees. If you want a straight species, you can find them in a lot of local native plant sellers. And I think they're going to put information on a few different choices for those in the chat. If you want to go to a regular nursery, most often they'll probably have Amelanchier cultivars, which have been propagated by humans to deliver certain traits. The advantage of cultivars is that you get a dependable, predictable tree for your garden. Some of the most popular serviceberry cultivars are listed here. So the names in quotes are the names of the cultivar. So anytime you see a plant that's got a name in quotes after it, you're pretty likely that that's a cultivar. Autumn Brilliance is one that you can find in a lot of places.
Thank you, Jane. Once I've purchased one, where would I put it in my garden and how should I take care of it?
So since it's an understory tree, it can handle part shade in your garden. But if you want to get the best flowering and the best fruit, then you're going to want at least 4 hours of sun. It prefers the moist, well-drained soil that you're going to read on most garden plants, but it can tolerate a large range of soils. We tend to have more acidic soil in this area, which serviceberry also prefers. You'll want to water it regularly for the first 2 years. After that, you can, kind of just let it go unless it's really hot or really dry. You can use a layer of mulch to retain moisture, but just keep it away from the base of the trunk, about 1 inch or 2. As I mentioned, it can grow as a shrub or a small tree, and you might find suckers growing around the base. If you look at the picture, there's one main stem sort of coming up straight in the middle, and then you can see some smaller stems circling around it. If you want a tree shape, you would just prune away right down at the base, all the ones except for the one going straight up. But if you just want a shrub, then you can just leave it as it is and just let it grow.
Jane, thank you for that great information. Next, Taunia is going to tell us about some pests and some problems of serviceberry.
Thank you, Linda. Jane, you got to talk about the beauty, but I am going to come in and talk about the beasts. So as serviceberry is in the Rosaceae family, it is susceptible to many of the same diseases and some of the same insect pest problems seen in other species within the family, like apples, pears, hawthorns, crab apples. Proper selection of resistant cultivars and good cultural practices of fertilization and watering can often prevent both disease and insect problems that are sometimes associated with serviceberry. Note that the incidence of insect pests are relatively low in landscape plantings.
Taunia, there are many diseases Are there any diseases that serviceberry are prone to, and how can I treat them or try to prevent them?
So there are a few I'd like to mention. A stressed Amelanchier, a juniper, and wet spring weather is the perfect combination of ingredients to bring out the evidence of cedar serviceberry rust. The rust is a fungus caused by one of the 7 species of Gymnospermgium, and it does require 2 hosts, a juniper, like an eastern red cedar, which is not damaged by the rust, and a serviceberry, where we often see the affected growth. Rust is fairly easy to identify. It looks like its name, usually orange in color and often a hairy-like fungus on a gall or the fruit. In the top picture, you can see the rusty color and some hairs starting to grow from the fruit. In the second photo, you can see the hairy growth coming from a rust spot on a leaf. As soon as you see it, the best thing to do is to prune it out and sterilize your tools and clean up and remove the fallen leaves as they fall. Next spring, consider applying an appropriate fungicide at the pre-bloom stage, beginning at bud break, according to the label directions.
While your pictures are interesting, I don't really want any rust on my fruits. Are there any other diseases that might affect my serviceberry?
Rusty fruit aren't very appetizing, that's for sure, and I'm plucking them off my personal serviceberry one by one as they appear. A serviceberry might also appear covered with white to gray powdery spots or blotches. This sometimes happens when there isn't great airflow around or through the plant. Planting in full sun initially is also a really good idea. If your serviceberry does start to show signs of powdery mildew, which appears in our area around July or August, it likely won't kill your plant, even if it isn't as pretty as you'd like for it to be. You can remove affected leaves if there aren't very many, and consider pruning to allow good air circulation through the plant. If it is completely covered, you can treat it with fungicide. Just check the label and make sure it's good for serviceberries and follow the instructions for application. Leaf spot, especially Entomosporium leaf spot, is a possible fungus as well. In my research, I couldn't find a picture of it on a serviceberry, which is actually really good news that it isn't very common. So the image shown is on a hawthorn leaf, which is in the same family. Those small, circular, bright red spots are the first symptoms, and they appear during warm, humid weather, like a typical Nova summer. Remove the spotted leaves, water at the base of the tree or shrub when needed, and consider removing any surrounding ground cover and replace it with mulch to improve air circulation. Fungicide could be applied, as mentioned before. Find a serviceberry on the label and follow the directions. But remember that fungicides are generally preventative treatments and not cures for most diseases.
Taunia, sounds like serviceberries are pretty resistant to disease, especially if we pick the right varieties. What about insect pests?
Well, there's a number of insects such as aphids, borers, miners, Japanese beetles, scale, and spider mites that may be a problem for serviceberry. Damage from them is generally not a serious problem. To help prevent damage, provide plenty of moisture to newly planted serviceberries while they're becoming established for the first 2 years, just like Jane advised. With that said, lacebugs are pretty common around our area and often found on azaleas. Sometimes they wander over to our serviceberries. Lacebugs are sucking insects that cause the damage you see in the photo. It almost looks like the leaves have been bleached. If you look closer, you can see tiny white or yellow dots on top of the leaf, and you may see black specks on the back. You can encourage natural predators such as assassin bugs, lady beetles, lacewing larvae, spiders, and predatory mites to feed on the lacebug eggs, nymphs, and adults. Or you can try a high-pressure water spray from a hose to knock off the nymphs in late May to early June. They lack wings and they can't return to your plant. You want to aim that water spray at the bottoms of the leaves where they're feeding. Insecticidal soaps and horticultural oils can be used on this pest with fairly good results and a lower impact on the natural enemies if the water method doesn't work. So I'd try those two before moving on to other insecticides.
Sounds like those are manageable by picking the right plant, putting it in the right place, and keeping an eye out for insects. Besides being fairly problem-free, what are other benefits the serviceberries provide?
So Jane is going to share one of the biggest benefits to people in just a second, but my favorite fun fact about serviceberries is that Virginia Tech has identified they support or host 58 wildlife species, including mammals such as chipmunks and foxes, and butterflies like the red spotted purple one in the photos. The adult, the egg, and the caterpillar are pictured, so we know when we've scored a butterfly. If you see those around, you'll want to keep them to get your butterfly. They also support 35 birds in Virginia, including robins, thrushes, grosbeaks, cardinals, finches, mockingbirds, catbirds, threshers, woodpeckers, and 2 of my favorite to capture in my own yard, well, not capture, but to see in my own yard, buntings and waxwings.
Wow, 58 species, that's impressive. So I want to add one to my yard. What companion plants would be best neighbors for my serviceberry?
So that's the beauty of the serviceberry. Part of where you're going to put it is the way you're going to use it in the form that you want it to take. It can be used as a screening plant where it blends into shrub borders and can act as a windbreak if needed, or a privacy screening around a deck or a patio. They can also be planted as a group, forming a small grove. They'll look best in odd-numbered clusters. They're attractive enough in all seasons to serve as specimen plantings. Dress the base with simple mulch and let it take center stage. They can be used in naturalized settings, such as woodland edges where they have part sun-loving, low-growing annuals, perennials, bulbs, or ground covers under them, like that picture in the middle. Another suggested use is to plant them against a backdrop of evergreens, where their contrasting forms will create some visual interest. But don't forget about those 2 hosts needed to create rust in your yard.
Thank you, Taunia. So we heard Taunia saying wildlife love the berries, but can we eat them too? Jane, is that right?
Yeah, it's true. So we can eat the berries if the birds are willing to leave us a few. The berries are edible on any of the varieties that I talked about at the beginning, but it's generally acknowledged that Amelanchier alnifolia has the tastiest berries. This species is found more in the Western United States and Canada, but our Zone 7 climate is adaptable enough that we can grow them here. Instead of the common name serviceberry, it's typically called Juneberry or Saskatoonberry, but it's the same general plant. If you decide to grow Juneberry in your garden, you may want to get 2. They're partially self-fertile, but it can help to have 2 plants planted near each other for cross-pollination. This is a picture of one of my 2 Juneberry trees. It's about 2 years old. It's about 3 feet tall. It hasn't produced fruit yet, but I'm hopeful that maybe this might be the first year. This is a picture of it flowering. And then after those pretty white flowers in the spring, the fruit is ready to harvest 45 to 60 days after flowering, which is typically mid-June to early July, which is why it's called Juneberry. Some of the fruit ripens before others, so you just pick the purple ones as they slowly darken.
Thank you, Jane. Have you ever tasted them?
Yes, actually, I have tasted them. On a trip to Canada, we found them just growing wild everywhere on hikes. This is a picture of my son eating one right off the tree in Canada. So I wasn't a huge fan, but my son loved them. They're lower in moisture than blueberries, so I personally find them a little woody or dry. But they do taste a little bit like a blueberry. And then the seeds inside give it kind of an almond cherry sort of flavor. And if you look at the studies here, it shows that they're nutritional powerhouses. They've got lots of fiber and protein and iron. So it's definitely an interesting food crop, maybe for the future.
How do you harvest them?
So I wanted to show you this fun video that we're hoping works. So you can you pick them off one by one, or, you know, this is us getting a little creative harvesting them up in Canada. Come on, video.
Well, it looks like we're not going to be able to show the fun video.
Yeah, Teresa asked a good question in the chat about a link to the video. So we'll do that. Let me see.
Okay.
Tanya's our expert at that sort of stuff.
Oh, now it's working.
This is,
Oh, it's working.
Pro Saskatoon picking. Make it rain.
there you go. So if my little tree ever gets that big, then that is what I'll do. But I think it might be a while until it gets to that point.
All right, great. Have you ever made any jams or pies from the,
All right.
whoops, sorry.
That's
Have you ever made any jams or pies with the berries?
Yes, and while I didn't care for the raw taste, I really liked them in jam. We also made pies. You can pretty much use them however you would use a blueberry. So you can make muffins, scones, etc. So just in summary, I hope all of this information helps you consider trying serviceberry in your garden.
Thank you, Jane. Jane, yum, yum. All right, the next slide is Jane's resources for the presentation. And the next slide is Tanya's resources for the presentation. Nancy, our Zoom support, do we have any questions in the chat?
I know we had one from Miriam. I can go back and scroll up to see that one. I think it was about planting serviceberry in a water-soaked location. Let's see. I would like to plant some serviceberry trees at the bottom of a sloping yard where water pools after rain. Would the serviceberries be able to thrive in periodic pooling of water? And I know Jane mentioned it in her presentation. Jane, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, definitely from the research that I've done, it looks like because the Amelanchier canadensis sort of naturally grows in more wet areas, I would say if I was going to try any of the serviceberry types, I would go with that one first. I mean, personally thinking about my garden, I definitely have someone that is sort of in the back area that gets a little boggy sometimes. And so far they're doing fine. And those are the Amelanchier canadensis. So I think I would go with that first and give it a try.
Any other questions, ladies?
I was just going to add, I know that whenever I was doing my research, I found that many of the serviceberries can tolerate water in the lawn that disappears after a day. And that was actually what led us to planting one in our front yard. We have a location that's exactly like that. So we planted autumn brilliance, but it's still a serviceberry and we're excited about it.
So it sounds like maybe a rain garden.
Exactly. That's what the suggestion was.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Terry just asked a follow-up question
There is another question.
Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
If it prefers loamy soil, will it grow in our clay soil or should we amend it?
I would, since it's a plant native to this area and we kind of naturally have clay soil in this area, it should be fine. All the ones that I've planted in my garden, I haven't amended the soil. I do make sure, personally, what I do with most of my garden plants is I'll take leaf compost that we've made from previous year's leaves and I spread it on top as my mulch. That's basically what I use as mulch. So I would do something like that. But generally I've seen that it's actually best not to amend your soil, especially for native plants that are used to the types of soil that we have here in this area.
Okay, Terry McLean has one more question. Which species grows best around here? She has a spot where she has not had good luck growing a tree and she wants one that has the best chance.
It's a good question. I would, if you're going to go with a straight species, and it's a generally, like not the wet, boggy area that we just talked about, I think I see downy serviceberry most often in the area. But otherwise, I would maybe go with one of the cultivars just because they have been developed, for some of the disease resistance that we sometimes see in the area. So if I don't know if you were trying to grow a serviceberry in that spot before and wanted to try a different one, then I would maybe go with one of the cultivars.
There are no more questions in the chat box.
Good questions.
All right. Thank you, Nancy, for monitoring our chat. Thank you to Jane and Taunia for all the wonderful information about service berries and what's blooming right now. Let's turn to questions from our registration. So this question was from Miriam, and she asked, which service berry trees and bushes are best for berry production? Jane, can you answer that question?
Yeah, so the more I sort of thought about this question, I think the more complex it became, because I was sort of looking at it, okay, well, you know, for sure the Amelanchier alnifolia that I talked about, those, you know, there's been a lot of work done on them, especially up in Canada, to really develop them as a human food crop. And so they've done work, obviously, choosing cultivars, choosing sports that have shown to have more berries than other plants. So they've sort of, you know, they're further along as far as perfecting which ones have heavy fruit load. And so those are some of the cultivars, if you're going to go with alnifolia, that are ranked high for berry production. So Pembina, Regent, Northline, Smoky, Honeywood. There's quite a few others. But then I was thinking about, well, you know, if it's not just for human food, if we want to be feeding the birds and all the other wildlife, you know, and maybe it's better to go with one of the cultivars that have been bred to have disease resistance, because I can tell you that, so the picture right here, those are berries on my 2 Juneberry plants that are, looks like I am going to have berries this year, but I had to pluck a few off already that had cedar rust or look like they had cedar rust. So if you can choose a cultivar that is more resistant to cedar rust, then you're going to have more berries, whether it's for you or the birds. So then I think I would maybe go with one of the cultivars for disease resistance. And then I did see when I was researching this a little bit that A. canadensis Prince William is a cultivar of the canadensis that's mentioned for having a high berry load. So that's, you know, that's the best I could come up with. It's a more complex question than I originally thought.
Sounds like you really
Thanks.
dug into it.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from Terry. And Terri, are you here today?
Yes, that's me.
Okay, great. So Terry's question is, should I not bother to put in any new trees since the cicadas might destroy them? Taunia, can you answer that question?
Absolutely. So Terry, it's a very legitimate concern this year, and the simple answer is just wait until June when they're all gone, because they do love the pencil thick branches that are so abundant on a brand new tree or a shrub in our yard. So you can see in the slide here the damage that they are going to do to that pencil thick branch while the female cicada is laying her eggs in the branch, which is what causes the damage. If you do have young trees that you want to protect, Virginia Tech recommends securing netting around the tree trunk, around the branches and the tree trunk to prevent the cicadas from climbing up to the tender twigs. While you're out there in your garden and you're checking on things, you might want to look for evidence that they have been damaging the trees and go ahead and cut those off and dispose of them. And that'll help us 17 years from now, not to have so many great cicadas come out. So if you're not going to be in the area, you can bless your future neighbors by being responsible now and helping to prevent huge emergence next time. Just a side note too, Virginia Tech does not recommend the use of pesticides on any of the cicadas because it could negatively impact the birds and the insects and the other natural predators that cicadas have. And so if you want to know more about cicadas, I have to give a plug for next Thursday. We have a virtual plant clinic specifically about cicadas. So I hope that answers your question and leads to you coming back to see us later.
Thank you, Taunia.